Hello, sixth grade scientists. We're going to continue our study of how energy and matter flow through ecosystems. So before we go to the next step, I wanted to do a quick review of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is really, really important to understand because that is where the food energy of all ecosystems begins, is because of the photosynthesis reaction. Okay, so the energy that goes into the system, into the ecosystem, starts as light energy from the sun, which the plants or other producers use to make glucose or carbohydrates. Okay, so understanding photosynthesis and knowing its role in the flow of matter and energy is really important. So the energy part, again, comes from the sun, and then there's matter that goes into the plant or the producer that is used to produce the glucose, the carbohydrates, and the oxygen, and that's carbon dioxide and water. So carbon dioxide gets into, for example, the plant cells by going into these little holes that are on the underside of leaves called stoma, or stomata is the plural, and that carbon dioxide is in the air around the plant, and it's a gas, so it can flow into those stomata and get into the leaves of the plant where photosynthesis is happening. The water gets into the plant through the roots. So in our study of the water cycle, we talked a little bit about plant uptake. So plants' roots are where the water gets absorbed. The leaves don't absorb water. The stems don't absorb water. It comes in through the roots, and then it travels all the way up to the leaves and other parts of the plant through these little tube systems. And we may give you some bonus science later on, okay? So just know that the carbon dioxide comes from the air around the plant or the producer, and the water in plants comes in through the roots and up to the leaves. So once all of those pieces are in place and the chlorophyll has trapped light energy from the sun, the photosynthesis reaction can happen, and it produces the carbohydrates and the oxygen. So those products are glucose, and there's the chemical formula again, and the oxygen gas. Now, the glucose is used for a lot of different things. So the plants themselves, the producers themselves, use some of that glucose for all of their activities. So like growing and producing different substances in the cells. And also the cell walls of plants are made of cellulose, which is a sugar. So glucose is important in the building of the cell wall. All right, but this is where we're going to start with our next section. Some of that glucose that is produced during photosynthesis, and we're really glad that it does, it gets passed on to the organisms that eat the producers. So this is where we start getting into the flow or the movement of energy and matter through the ecosystem. So the energy starts with the light. The matter starts with carbon dioxide and water. Through the photosynthesis reaction, it produces carbohydrates or glucose and oxygen. That glucose is used for energy in the plant, but it's also used by any organism that eats the plant, because some of that glucose is stored in the leaves and the stems and the roots. So for example, if you eat a potato, the potato has glucose. It was stored in that structure, the potato, when the plant made glucose. So when you eat the potato, you get some of the glucose that was made through photosynthesis. If you eat lettuce, if you eat a tomato, if you eat, oh my gosh, any plant thing that you eat, any plant matter that you eat, you're getting your food energy from them. But those producers, those plants, got that food energy by doing photosynthesis. Okay, and glucose and oxygen are both important for producing another type of energy in animals, in living things, called ATP, but that's kind of advanced, so we don't worry about that too much. Okay, now here we get into the new stuff. So once the producers have made glucose, they can pass it along by being consumed. So we call organisms that get their food energy by consuming other organisms consumers. Now, plants are organisms, they're just producers, right? So consumers will eat either producers or they'll eat other consumers. And we also call them heterotrophs. Heterotrophs. So if you hear heterotrophs or consumer, that's the same thing. We just use different terms. So you will hear both of them. And there are a lot of different types of consumers. So the first level consumers, or primary consumers we call them, are herbivores. Herbivores are consumers that only eat producers. So they eat plant, like the zebra, they only eat, grass and plants. So they are considered an herbivore, and an herbivore is a primary consumer. Now we do use this abbreviation, 1 degree, it looks like, but that is also a short abbreviation or symbol for primary. Okay. So if you, in environmental science, if you're talking about a primary consumer, if you use this, people will understand, everyone will understand, because that's an abbreviation that we use. All right, so that's herbivores. The next type of consumer are omnivores. Now, omnivores are really cool consumers because they can eat either producers or other consumers. Okay, so they like plant stuff, they like vegetables and fruit, but they would also maybe eat insects or fish or things like that. So they're called omnivores. And the word root omni means kind of all. So this means that they will eat just about anything. Some examples are pigs. Pigs will eat both plant matter and animal matter. Here's a possum. I don't know if you guys have ever seen one of these. They're little nocturnal creatures. They're mainly out at night, and they're very shy, but they look kind of weird, and so sometimes people get scared, but they're actually more scared of you than you are of them. All right, and then didn't mean to do that. Then raccoons is another example of an omnivore. We saw the picture of the raccoon in the pond ecosystem that we've been looking at. And raccoons will eat fish, they'll eat bugs, they'll eat all kinds of plant matter, all kinds of producers. And then turtles. Some turtles are omnivores, some turtles are herbivores. So it just kind of depends on what they eat, right? So if an organism eats a producer, they're considered primary, right? But if they eat another consumer, that means they're a secondary consumer. So sometimes this pig could be a primary consumer, and sometimes we could call it a secondary consumer. The raccoon can sometimes be considered a primary consumer if it eats plants, or it could be considered a secondary consumer if it eats a fish, because the fish then ate something else. So if it eats a producer, it's primary. If it eats another consumer, it's secondary. Same thing for all of these. All right, then the next group of consumers, or heterotrophs, are carnivores, and carnivores that consume only other animals. So they would be considered secondary if they eat an herbivore, right? They would be tertiary if they ate an omnivore that ate an animal. And then quaternary is the fourth level consumer. Okay, so you see secondary, we had primary, now we have secondary, we have tertiary, and we have quaternary. You can repeat those words so that you will feel more comfortable. So there are things like, crocodile, a wolf, that we've looked at in Yellowstone. They are definitely carnivores. This is a lynx or a bobcat. I'm not quite sure which one. Also a carnivore. And then that is a weasel, I think. And so these are all animals that only get their food energy by eating other animals. So we call them carnivores. All right, and the next group are the scavengers. Now, the scavengers will eat mostly dead animals, but they will also eat dead plants sometimes. But the thing is they don't capture and kill their food. So this looks like maybe a water buffalo that has been killed, probably by a lion or some other big predator. And so once those predators move away, then like the vultures, and this is a jackal, they will move in and feed on the dead animal that's left behind. Okay, so those are called scavengers. Sometimes scavengers are like beetles. They can be small insects. They can be different kinds of birds. So there are a lot of different types of scavengers. And then finally, we have the detritivores and decomposers. Now, many times when you look at these, even some scientists call all of these organisms decomposers. Okay. But if you want to be very specific, decomposers don't have mouth parts, and detritivores do have mouth parts. Now, it may not be a mouth like we have, with jaws and teeth and the tongue, but there's some kind of opening through which these organisms consume their food. Okay, so detritivores have mouth parts. So the earthworm has a mouth opening, and it also has an anus opening where it excretes, like it poops, right? And then the roly-poly on the side, these are called isopods. Sometimes they're called pill bugs, sometimes they're called sow bugs, but they actually have mouth parts where they can consume their food. So they are sometimes called decomposers, but to be very specific, they are actually detritivores because they have mouth parts. Now, the decomposers, like the bacteria, this is an example of, I think this is a staph bacteria of some kind, and then this is fungi, right, a mushroom. So what these organisms do is they usually secrete some kind of chemical that actually dissolves the plant or animal that they want to eat. Okay, so the fungi get their food energy by releasing chemicals into the soil where there's plant matter and animal matter, and the bacteria do the same thing. Whatever animal or plant that they're in, or if they're on a dead carcass, like the scavengers were eating, the bacteria are probably there already getting food energy, but they don't have mouth parts, so they have to secrete some kind of chemical in order to kind of like dissolve it and then absorb it into their bodies. Okay, and the bacteria, each one of these is one bacteria, because bacteria are single-celled organisms. Okay, so next time we're going to talk about a little bit more about the flow of energy, and we'll be looking at food chains and food webs. Okay, so that is this next section on consumers. And if you have any questions, please let me or your teacher know. Thank you.